Ireland is supposedly a wealthy country. Tech giants like Apple, Google and Facebook have all chosen Ireland as their European headquarters, due in large part to the country's low corporate taxes. But for many people, Ireland doesn't really feel wealthy. Rents and house prices are sky high, childcare is exorbitant, cars are way more expensive than in neighbouring countries, and salaries haven't risen quickly enough to compensate, at least outside the high-paying multinational sector. So if Ireland is supposedly rich, why are so many people struggling? There are many reasons for this. The major ones being expensive housing, high energy costs, and long hospital waiting lists. But there is another reason that's far less known. The coxswain. In rowing, the coxswain is the person sat at the back of the boat, whose job it is to steer and guide the rowers, an aquatic jockey of sorts. Governments employ thousands of rowers and coxswain. For rowers, think teachers, doctors, nurses and Gardaí, people who perform visible work, also known as frontline workers. For coxswain, think administrators, regulators and marketers, people who work in an office or from home. Under the Irish government's 18 departments, we find an array of quasi-non-governmental organisations, or quangos for short. The country's largest quango, the Health Service Executive, or HSC, has seen its spending on office and admin expenses more than double since 2016, rising from just under €500 million to over €1 billion today, an increase of over 100%, despite the population growing by less than 10% over the same period. But what has this got to do with the quality of life in Ireland? Well, quangos are funded by people's taxes. Ireland's sales tax, or value-added tax, is a whopping 23%, and if you're buying a new house, approximately 1/3 is taxes and other soft costs. Ireland's top rate of income tax at 52% is among the highest in the world, and taxes on alcohol and cars put Ireland on the European tax podium every year. Tax is not really the issue though. It's what people get in return. And the problem in Ireland is that while we pay Scandinavian taxes, we don't get Scandinavian services. As Gerard Howland writes, in fits and starts, but without any plan to speak of, we have exploded the size of the state. In 2015, Ireland spent €54 billion. This year, it'll be 90 billion plus. I challenge anyone to explain how public services and infrastructure have improved in tandem with the rise in public spending. This was written in 2023. Since then, projected government spending for 2024 has jumped to €110 billion, and it's unclear where the money is going. While the HSC retains the services of rowers like doctors and nurses, for other quangos such as on board Bia, Fáilte Ireland and Tourism Ireland, it's a case of rowers need not apply. These organisations are essentially marketing agencies. Fáilte Ireland markets domestic tourism, Tourism Ireland markets the island of Ireland abroad, and Board Bia markets Irish food, at home and abroad. There's nothing wrong with government marketing per se. In 2013 and 2014, the economy was on the floor following the financial crisis, so tourism initiatives like The Gathering made sense to stimulate demand. But today, Ireland's problem is not demand, but supply, be it a shortage of housing, hotels, childcare spaces or Gardaí. The increased marketing spend since 2015 is especially puzzling for the two tourism bodies because the COVID-19 pandemic led to major travel restrictions, housing refugees from the war in Ukraine reduced hotel capacity, and Ireland has taken an increasingly strict stance on Airbnb rentals. For the government to keep growing its tourism marketing budget while restricting the supply of beds is like a company ramping up its marketing spend while slashing the size of its factory floor. It makes little sense. It's important to say that these bodies have some great people who do great work. Fáilte Ireland's signature programmes like the Wild Atlantic Way are regarded as a success, but their budgets and costs on society can't just keep growing. Cafes and restaurants are closing at record rates, yet coxswain are protected. Average salaries are €60,000 at Fáilte Ireland and €80,000 at Board Bia, with full job security and generous pensions. There's also the question of whether we still need these bodies in the digital age. In the case of food, let's consider three Irish food conglomerates, Kerry Group, Glanbia and Ornua. They have combined annual sales of €16 billion and employ over 30,000 people globally. As the owners of household food brands such as Kerrygold, Yoplait and Denny, they spend vast sums on marketing each year. Being Irish is their unique selling point, so their marketing has secondary benefits for all Irish producers. Should taxpayers add to these efforts? As for alcohol, it's even easier to make the case that Guinness, Jameson and Baileys are perfectly capable of flying the flag for Ireland. In addition to marketing, two of the three bodies run quality certification programs. Again, do we really need these certifications? There's already a requirement to display the country of origin on food packaging, and retailers frequently run campaigns advertising the Irishness of their meat, vegetables and other products, because they know Irish people like Irish food. The quality mark is a nice to have, but do we need or want public sector workers deciding which producers meet some subjective measure of quality? If SuperValu suddenly lowered standards to the extent that rotten eggs began appearing on its shelves, it wouldn't take long before word spread on social media and they heard from the Food Safety Authority, another quango. Bord Bia spends millions telling us about their certifications, but it's unclear how many people pay attention to them. One trend we observe with quangos is declining income from visible sources, such as sales and levies, and an increased reliance on central government funding. Take Bord Bia again. If there is a case for government-funded food marketing, it is to promote things like Irish beef abroad. It wouldn't make sense for a few farmers to pay for Irish beef marketing alone, so Bord Bia charges meat factories a statutory levy for each cow, pig and sheep slaughtered in the state, creating a pool of marketing funds from which they all benefit. However, since 2015, Bord Bia's levy revenues have declined in real money terms, while its central government funding has grown by 50%. This is not surprising. Government funding is easy. It just requires carefully managing the minister, whereas market-based income requires delivering value for money. The same trend can be seen in the most famous quango of all, the national broadcaster RTE, whose top brass have been very good to themselves. RTE requires a whole other episode, but with TV licence revenue declining, careful management of the minister is now required. Quangos can also be quite fluffy. Bord Bia makes cooking videos, while Fáilte Ireland gives us TikTok tips and marketing lessons on YouTube.
Select your birthday and make sure it shows that you're at least 18.
Whether this should be the government's job is another question. And with only 6,000 subscribers on Fáilte Ireland's YouTube channel after 497 videos, one begins to question their budget of €190 million a year. Of course, these bodies are just the tip of the iceberg. Ireland's central bank doubles as a financial regulator and now employs 2,100 people despite Ireland no longer having its own currency. And since 2014, our largest financial institutions are directly regulated by the European Central Bank in partnership with the Irish authorities. Ireland does have a large fund industry, but not as large as Luxembourg's, which has fewer regulators, as do similar-sized countries like Finland and Denmark, even though Denmark's financial industry employs more people. On the non-regulatory side, which handles currency management among other things, the headcount of 1,100 employees is over 3 times that of Finland and 2.5 times that of Denmark, despite Denmark still having its own currency. Duplication is another problem with quangos. The central bank says it engages in economic analysis, but the Department of Finance and the ESRI already do that. It also compiles statistics, but the Central Statistics Office does that perfectly well. And there are clear signs that over-regulation is harming consumers. Ulster Bank and KBC have left the country, while Revolut and Starling couldn't get in. Revolut had to passport in via Lithuania, and Starling just gave up after 4 years of trying. The reduced competition inevitably raises the cost of financial services like mortgages and insurance. Many people will be uncomfortable with the notion of scaling back the central bank, but if the bank employed 3,000 or 4,000 people, the reaction would likely be the same, due in part to Ireland's wounded self-confidence following the Troika bailout. Irish central bankers are also well paid, earning €80,000 on average, though their salaries are trumped by the National Treasury Management Agency next door, whose 773 staff earn a cool €91,000 on average. Both quangos give employees gold-plated pensions, but whether they need to be in gold-plated buildings is debatable, given that they carry out subtasks of their parent, the Department of Finance, which could be handling many of these functions itself for less money. It seems the boat that is our little state is packed full of expensive coxswain, and taxpayers paying their wages are feeling the strain. Irish government budgets in recent decades have followed a sawtooth pattern.
As a community, we are living way beyond our means,
Steadily increasing until the money runs out.
I can confirm that the government has today decided that Ireland apply for financial assistance.
Economists like Colin McCarthy are then hauled in to set up a so-called board snip, which recommends cuts to get the country back on track, and usually quangos are top of the list. Indeed, the 2009 McCarthy report marked Fáilte Ireland and Bord Bia for slimming down and dissolution respectively, yet they keep growing. The problem is, a quango doesn't just go away. It is shielded from competition, and its CEO will never approach the minister and say, "You don't need us anymore." The approach must happen in the opposite direction, but ministers don't do this because they don't really care. It's not their money, and the voters in their constituency won't reward them for picking a fight. It's a classic case of concentrated benefits and distributed costs. The quango is highly motivated to increase its budget, while taxpayers don't notice the costs of everything slowly creeping up. And the direction of travel is towards ever more quangos, all with their own offices, management, pensions and expense accounts. So what can be done? In our view, there are two areas that should be looked at. First, for marketing agencies like On Board Bia, central funding should be discontinued entirely, with the relevant industry given a vote on any statutory levies, as the industry might decide to remove the levy and the quango altogether. Lower costs would mean lower prices, and given that food sales are highly sensitive to price, this would result in increased sales and exports, which is the whole point of On Board Bia in the first place. As for Fáilte Ireland, perhaps hotels and restaurants along the Wild Atlantic Way would prefer a 9% VAT rate to allow them to do some of their own digital marketing, rather than the government doing it on their behalf. Apart from the budget savings, removing central funding would depoliticise these bodies. When the Irish government uses taxpayer money to stimulate demand for alcohol, beef or food more generally, this is a political choice. In other areas, the government is agitating for reductions in alcohol consumption, caloric intake and cattle herd sizes. By removing central funding, public money would be saved, the process would be depoliticised, and we wouldn't be paying people to steer the boat in opposite directions. Another way to discipline spending is through localism, a common theme of this channel. Fáilte Ireland has tripled spending on signature programmes like the Wild Atlantic Way in the past decade. If Western counties had to fund Wild Atlantic Way marketing from locally raised taxes, they might ease off on the marketing spend when their hotels were housing refugees. Secondly, there is a case for a team within government, if it doesn't already exist, tasked with recommending ways to merge or dissolve quangos, whose functions are duplicated or obsolete, and to resist the creation of new ones. The government's own public spending code recommends the use of sunset clauses to allow for programmes to be wound up if they don't pass a value for money test, and the sun has clearly set on many of them. For example, we no longer need a team of government employees going around the country telling us which B&Bs are up to scratch, because our phones provide us with a wealth of ratings and reviews that we didn't have when Fáilte Ireland was founded. The same applies to their social media tips or Board Bia's cooking videos. This content already exists. The government doesn't need to show people how to cook lamb chops. It's not nice to say that certain jobs or functions are no longer needed, but the state can afford to be generous with voluntary redundancy payments, which are tax-free, allowing people to pursue startup ideas or enter the private sector in what is a full employment economy. And other staff can be reassigned to alternative roles and departments. To say that Ireland's problems are all down to overspending on coxswain is of course not true. As we said at the outset, housing, energy costs and healthcare access are bigger factors that reduce quality of life below where it should be. Ireland is still a great country with high living standards, but our bumper corporate tax revenues hide an underlying problem deep within the state, namely a chronic inability to build things, whether it's hospitals, transport infrastructure or houses, and a government tendency to increase spending on administration, regulation and marketing. There's also a worrying trend of centralising power in unelected quangos, which is most visible in housing, where the dominance of An Bord Pleanála and especially the newly created planning regulator result in less money going to private rowers like block layers and carpenters, and more to planning consultants and lawyers. Ireland is a rich country, but to young people locked out of the housing market, it certainly doesn't feel that way. In the humble view of this channel, the Irish government is trying to do too much, when it should be doing the basics well. A more efficient state could increase investment in infrastructure, reduce soft costs on new housing, reduce the tax burden on small businesses and the wider population, and treat rowers better than countries like Australia, who are luring away doctors and even Gardaí. Better use of public money can make a real difference to people's lives. An MRI scanner costs about €1 million, a DART rail carriage about €3.5 million, and 1 kilometre of motorway costs about €10 million. Residents and tourists in Ireland's ancient east shouldn't have to wait 30 minutes for the next DART, while extending the Western Railway corridor and the motorway from Tuam to Sligo would make the way along the Atlantic a little less wild. We'd love to know what you think. This is the first in a series on government efficiency and quangos, including on Ireland's arguably underrated health system when compared to other countries. So please, drop us an email if you've any first-hand knowledge, as we have mountains of quangos to get through. And since we receive none of that generous government funding, we'd really appreciate your support on patreon.com/policy, where for just €5 you can chat with us and other members. You can also buy us a coffee using the link in the description below. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you'd like to see more from us. Thanks for watching, and slán go fóill.